For centuries, Europe and the Near East were worlds apart, not just geographically, but culturally, politically, and religiously. Christians and Muslims had lived in parallel, sometimes hostile, sometimes peaceful, often unaware of each other's daily life. But by the late 11th century, something changed. Suddenly, the two worlds collided in a series of wars that would reshape history, religion, and civilization itself. Why did the Crusades happen? Who fought them, and why? Were they purely about faith, or about power, wealth, and politics? And how did a series of campaigns launched in the name of God come to influence Europe, the Middle East, and even the wider world for centuries to come? In this video, we're going to explore the full story of the Crusades, their origins, battles, consequences, and lasting impact. So without any delay, let's begin. The story begins long before the First Crusade was called. In the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was under pressure. Once the mightiest Christian empire in the world, Byzantium faced relentless attacks from Seljuk Turks, a powerful Muslim force that had advanced into Anatolia, threatening the heart of the empire. The Byzantines, desperate for help, turned west to their fellow Christians in Europe. Meanwhile, Europe was changing. Feudal kingdoms were consolidating power, knights were seeking purpose beyond local conflicts, and the Church, under reformist popes, sought both spiritual and temporal authority. Pilgrimages to the Holy Land were growing in popularity, and news of Muslim control over Jerusalem and other sacred sites stirred religious fervor. In 1095, Pope Urban II gave a speech at Clermont that changed everything. He called on Christians to take up arms and liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. He promised spiritual rewards, indulgences, forgiveness of sins, and eternal salvation to those who joined the campaign. But it wasn't just religion. The Crusades offered an outlet for restless knights, a chance for younger sons to gain land, and an opportunity for European rulers to expand influence abroad. The stage was set. A holy war between East and West was about to begin. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, was an extraordinary mix of devotion, ambition, and chaos. Tens of thousands of men, from kings to peasants, marched across Europe toward Constantinople, then into Anatolia and the Levant. It was not a single organized army, but a collection of smaller forces, each with its own leaders, agendas, and conflicts. The journey was brutal. Many died from hunger, disease, and attacks along the way. But the survivors reached the Levant and faced the Seljuk Turks at several battles, learning quickly how to adapt to new tactics and terrain. The most famous moment of the First Crusade was the siege of Jerusalem in 1099. After months of grueling campaigns, Crusaders encircled the city. Defenders fought fiercely, but the Crusaders, motivated by religious zeal and the promise of eternal reward, stormed the walls. What followed was a massacre. Christian sources recount tens of thousands of Muslims and Jews killed, while Crusaders celebrated their holy victory. Jerusalem became the crown jewel of the newly established Crusader states: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. For the first time, a Western European presence was firmly established in the Levant, but victory did not bring stability. Crusader states were surrounded by hostile Muslim powers, isolated, and dependent on supply lines from Europe. Internal disputes between princes, nobles, and military orders like the Knights Templar and the Hospitallers weakened them further. At the same time, Muslim rulers, most notably Imad ad-Din Zengi and later Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin, began unifying their forces. They were patient, strategic, and determined. They learned from the Crusaders' strengths and exploited their weaknesses. The Second Crusade, launched in 1147 after the fall of Edessa, was a disaster for the Europeans. Led by European kings like Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, the campaign failed to achieve its objectives. Poor coordination, long supply lines, and underestimating the resilience of Muslim forces led to crushing defeats. Yet, the failure set the stage for the rise of Saladin. who would become the most famous Muslim leader of the era. By 1187, Saladin had unified Egypt and Syria and captured Jerusalem from the Crusaders in a decisive victory at the Battle of Hattin. The loss shocked Europe. Christian leaders responded with the Third Crusade, led by some of Europe's most famous figures: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. The Third Crusade was a campaign of legendary battles, sieges, and diplomacy. Barbarossa drowned crossing a river. Philip returned to France early, leaving Richard to continue the fight. Richard captured key cities along the coast and secured a truce with Saladin, allowing Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem, but failing to retake the city itself. The crusade had been both heroic and inconclusive, demonstrating the limits of military force in achieving religious goals. Meanwhile, Europe itself was changing. Crusades were no longer just military expeditions to the Holy Land. They became opportunities for political maneuvering, territorial expansion, and economic gain. Merchants in Venice, Genoa, and Pisa financed fleets and profited immensely from transporting crusaders, weapons, and supplies. Wealth, trade, and commerce became deeply entwined with religious war. Crusading was increasingly seen not only as a spiritual act, but also as a way to enhance status, influence, and economic power. The Fourth Crusade, launched in 1202, was a turning point, but not in the way the Church had intended. Crusaders never reached the Holy Land. Instead, they diverted to Constantinople, besieged the city, and captured it in 1204. The result was catastrophic. The Byzantine Empire was fractured, Constantinople sacked, and Western influence extended into the heart of Eastern Christianity. Political and cultural consequences reverberated for centuries. Many historians argue that this event, more than any other, deepened the schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, leaving the Byzantine Empire permanently weakened against future threats, including the Ottoman Turks. Even as Europe continued to launch crusades, the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, success became increasingly elusive. Logistics, disease, desertion, and lack of coordination hampered campaigns. Many crusaders fell to heat, malaria, or starvation before facing armies. Leadership disputes, competing ambitions, and misunderstandings about the terrain undermined military effectiveness. At the same time, Muslim powers, particularly under leaders like the Mamluks, became more organized, disciplined, and militarily skilled. The Mamluks eventually repelled the final Crusader strongholds, capturing Acre in 1291, effectively ending Christian territorial presence in the Holy Land. Yet, the Crusades were not failures in terms of influence. They reshaped Europe profoundly. They brought knowledge of science, medicine, architecture, and mathematics from the East. They opened trade routes connecting Europe to the Mediterranean and beyond. They encouraged centralization of monarchies, development of standing armies, and the rise of banking and finance to support long-term campaigns. They also hardened religious identities, fueling centuries of tension between Christians, Muslims, and Jews, sometimes violent, sometimes cultural. By the end of the 13th century, the crusading era had changed both East and West permanently. European powers had gained exposure to a broader world, while the Islamic world had proven resilient against foreign incursions, strengthening internal political structures and cultural confidence. Jerusalem remained a symbol, not of Christian dominance, but of contested faith, history, and memory. The Crusades had created a narrative of holy war that influenced not only medieval politics, but global perceptions of religion and conflict for centuries to come. Beyond the battlefield, the Crusades had enormous political consequences. In Europe, kings learned that large-scale campaigns could only succeed with strong centralized authority. Monarchs like Philip II of France and Richard the Lionheart discovered that controlling armies abroad required not just personal loyalty, but also taxation systems, alliances, and administration. In some regions, crusading nobles sold or mortgaged lands to finance their campaigns. which led to consolidation of power in the hands of monarchs and the gradual weakening of feudal fragmentation. The rise of national identity, especially in France and England, was accelerated by participation in these holy wars, creating a sense of shared purpose among subjects far from the battlefield. The economic impact of the Crusades was equally profound. Italian city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa became powerful commercial hubs, supplying fleets, transporting armies, and trading luxury goods such as spices, silk, and precious metals. Trade between East and West flourished, laying the groundwork for the commercial revolution in Europe. Eastern Mediterranean ports transformed into international marketplaces, and merchants, bankers, and craftsmen gained influence that rivaled traditional feudal lords. Even agriculture was affected. Demand for food, horses, and supplies prompted innovations in farming, storage, and transport. Culturally, the Crusades facilitated a remarkable exchange of ideas. Europeans encountered advanced Islamic medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Texts from the ancient Greeks, preserved and expanded by Muslim scholars, were translated into Latin and reintroduced to Europe. Gothic architecture, sophisticated fortifications, and military engineering techniques were influenced by contact with Middle Eastern cities. Culinary traditions, textiles, and artistic styles traveled west, enriching European life and broadening perspectives. In a way, the Crusades acted as a bridge between civilizations, even amid violence and hostility. Religiously, the Crusades left a complex legacy. They intensified Christian-Muslim antagonism and deepened divisions between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, particularly after the sack of Constantinople. Jewish communities in Europe suffered massacres as Crusaders marched east, an early form of religiously motivated anti-Semitism that would echo through centuries. At the same time, pilgrimage to the Holy Land became more structured and accessible, and the ideal of fighting for a sacred cause became central to the European conception of spiritual duty. The concept of holy war gained theological legitimacy, influencing later conflicts far beyond the medieval period. Globally, the Crusades altered the balance of power. The Byzantine Empire never fully recovered from the Fourth Crusade, leaving it vulnerable to eventual Ottoman conquest. Muslim powers, initially fragmented, learned to unify effectively against a common enemy, strengthening institutions in Egypt, Syria, and Persia. Trade networks expanded, linking Europe more closely to the Mediterranean, North Africa, and Asia, and perhaps most importantly, the Crusades exposed Europe to a wider world, planting seeds for exploration, colonial ambitions, and later global interactions that would define the modern era. Yet, despite all the bloodshed, the Crusades were a story of adaptation, resilience, and transformation. Neither Europe nor the Middle East achieved total dominance. Both suffered losses and gained knowledge. Leaders learned the limits of military power and the importance of diplomacy. Soldiers and civilians alike encountered new cultures, languages, and technologies. Cities and economies evolved, trade networks expanded, and political systems became more sophisticated. Jerusalem, the symbol at the center of these wars, remained contested, reminding the world that even the holiest of causes could not guarantee permanent conquest. In retrospect, the Crusades were a paradox. They were brutal, bloody, and often futile militarily. But they were also engines of change, connectivity, and transformation. They reshaped societies, altered political structures, fostered trade and cultural exchange, and left a legacy that continues to influence international relations, religion, and identity today. They show how ideology, ambition, and belief can collide with geography, politics, and human resilience to create a world that is profoundly different from what it was before. The story of the Crusades is not just about battles, sieges, and kings. It is about people, peasants and knights marching across continents, scholars translating texts, merchants navigating new markets, rulers balancing ambition and faith. It is about how conflict can simultaneously destroy and create, how cultures can clash violently yet exchange knowledge, and how a series of wars launched in the name of God became a turning point in world history. The Crusades remind us that history is rarely simple. They were a story of devotion, violence, ambition, and adaptation, of East meeting West, and both being transformed in ways that would echo for centuries. They teach lessons about the limits of power, the complexity of human motives, and the unintended consequences of action. Above all, they demonstrate that wars fought for religion, territory, or prestige often leave legacies far beyond the battlefield, shaping economies, politics, culture, and even belief systems for generations. And so, when we look back at the Crusades, we see more than just holy wars. We see the collision of civilizations, the birth of new political and economic systems, and the enduring impact of human ambition and belief. They are a story of both destruction and creation, of cities taken and cultures connected, of armies clashing and trade flourishing, of faith guiding soldiers and ambition guiding kings. Now, I want to ask you, looking back, do you think the Crusades were more a story of religious devotion or political ambition? Were they a necessary conflict or a tragic series of wars with lasting consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below.